Or not Ethiopians are what they call Ethiopians, Somalians, Eritreans, and Djiboutis are actually African children fathered by Arab males. Prior to slavery and during slavery. That's why you see a lot of Ethiopians in Africa, they're actually mixed. But because they're born in Africa, they're not aware of the mixed part of it due to the fact that Ethiopians are actually born in Africa. So majority of these Ethiopians are not aware that being born in Africa does not necessarily mean they are native to Africa. They're not native to Africa. And most Ethiopians are well aware. This is why a lot of Ethiopians are not classified in Africa as Africans or as blacks. They're not associated like that. Because most of them, their forefathers were not black. You see what I'm saying? All their forefathers were not black. In fact, if you look at Obama, Obama is seen as black. Why? Because he's fathered by black men. His ancestors are in the continent. A lot of Ethiopians, Somalians, Djiboutians, and Eritreans, their fathers are in the Middle East. You know what I'm saying? So if you look at Ethiopia itself and Eritrea, and the clash between Ethiopia and Eritrea was merely because Ethiopians were more Christian Orthodox. They were more Christian. And the Christian Orthodox Church has been in Ethiopia for a very long time. But the north of Ethiopia was mainly like Somalians, were more Islamic. You see what I'm saying? They took the region of Islam, the same thing which happened to Sudan again. North Sudan are more Islamic because a lot of people especially a lot of people born in Africa through interracial relations are not aware of the fact that because of being born in Africa does not necessarily mean you are native. A lot of people are not aware of that. Ethiopians are not aware of that because they were fathered in Africa. So they think they're native, but the real natives are not. The Ethiopians are not native to Africa. Ethiopians are born from native black females. You know what I'm saying? When Europeans came to Kenya, the largest group of people in Kenya were the Maasai. The Maasai were the more largest group. Same thing applies even if Europeans went to South Africa. The largest group was Zulus. In Ethiopia, the largest group, but they interbred. When Europeans came in, they interbred. And then a lot of people mixed into European. And then a lot of people end up having children with Europeans. And, you know, and bit by bit, after 300 or 400 years, a lot of people have been mixed up. The natives, or the real natives, have become so small and small and small. Just like in Kenya, the largest group of people were the Maasai. Those are the groups which are known in Kenya, but they were reduced to pretty much a tourism effect. They were reduced because a lot of tribes were mixed violently and then interbred, and a lot of them mixed, and a lot of them end up leaving their culture, which previously used to be the dominant when Europeans came. But when Europeans came in, they took charge, then they banned all other sectors of the economy, all other cultural, tribes were destroyed. You know what I'm saying? And then they introduced European, and the Arabs did the same thing. In fact, the Arabs, they were the first people to introduce the Islamic culture in Africa, and they destroyed, because back in Africa, a lot of black people were not aware of the impact of black people didn't think of any impact of what you call impact of foreign, or especially as our Arabs in Africa. The impact of Arabs in Africa was very negative in Africa, very, very negative, very violent and very negative. Because when Arabs came in to Africa, a lot of African kings had no idea, because Arabs were merchants, they were sort of like sellers. But when they came to Africa, a lot of our African kings had no idea of the motives or the impact of the Arab people. So they offered them, they introduced the trade with them, and these Arabs came to sell, what I call cloth blankets, cloth sheets, and things of that nature. And black people traded with ivory, gold, and things of that nature. But later on, the Arabs coming from the Middle East settled in Africa. But because African leaders at that time, they had an ancient African culture, which means you help your own neighbor, or if your neighbor wants a space to stay, you give them. But then that was only for black tribes. But sadly, when the Arab people came in with evil motives, black people didn't know. It's sort of like they extended their culture to non-black people, and the impact was negative and extremely bad news for black people. Because the Arabs came in to Africa, they had sort of like better weapons than the native Africans. It's like introducing an enemy into your house only to find that an enemy is better, so it's got better weaponry than you. And so it became easier when the Arabs came to Africa to easily overtake a lot of African countries. But the Arabs were the most vicious people in Africa. They mingled. They're the first people, in fact, to mate and interracially took over with the black native females. A lot of people born from native African females, the children born between Arabs and natives, is the reason that North Africa is so messed up. You see what I'm saying? Because a lot of black people in Africa, they didn't know the impact of children born between Arab males and native African females. The impact, all children born between African black females and foreign Arab males, those children took the culture of their father. Because in Africa, children followed the father's footsteps. They're named under their father, not their mother. It's a cultural, it has been an ancient cultural name. Children follow the cultural of their father. They follow their biological father. They're named after their father. They follow their father's footsteps. And if a child is fathered by Arab males introduced their culture to the children. And that's how North Africa became more Islamic. North Nigeria, North Mali, North Sudan, Ethiopia, North Ethiopia, which includes countries like Eritrea, Somalia, and all the north of Africa became very poisoned. But the culture is from the Middle East. Even the DNA of every North African person is linked to the Middle East. Sadly, it was through the females. You see what I'm saying? Because black people at that time, they didn't understand the impact. See, if 10,000 Arab males from the Middle East came to Africa and mixed with the 10,000 black African female, there will be 10,000 babies born. If they've got 2 children each, there will be 20,000 children born. If they've got 3, there will be 30,000 children born. Now, imagine if you have got 50 million Arab males in North Africa mixing with 50 million North African black females, natives, which are dark natives. The children born, you already have got a nation. And the impact, a lot of that, at that time, people didn't understand and know the impact, what was called interracial stuff. It was not necessarily understood in Africa because people were tribalistic. Yet at the same time, certain things was happening during trade and interaction with people. The only thing is, Africans didn't leave Africa to go to the Middle East for Middle Eastern women. No. It was Middle Eastern people, those who were coming to Africa and discovering Africa, that the ones, sadly, they were only males. They were either European males or Arab males. But the first contact of people were Arab males. Arab males had easy access to Africa than Europeans. Europeans came later on in the 1300s. Arab males had already been there in Africa. They had already been there in North Africa already. So they had access from North Africa to coming south of Africa. As a result, due to the fact that they had better weaponry, they accessed a lot of African tribes, which majority of African tribes were not militant years ago. Very few African tribes were militant. The bulk of African tribes were just kings and their tribes. Kings and their tribes. None of them were militant. And so they were completely walk over, especially if someone is militant from an outside. People who accessed weapons outside, coming to Africa, they could discover a lot of African tribes that they were very vulnerable, extremely vulnerable. Because you find a group of kings, many African countries at that time, they had no reason to be militant. You see, ancient people had no reason to be militant. Very few African tribes were militant in Africa. Very few. In the south of Africa, it was basically the Zulus. They were the only ones which were militant in the south of Africa. They were the only sort of like largest, better equipped people. But the rest of the countries in the south of Africa, they didn't have military at all. They were not even militant at all. And in North Africa, because there was no reason, the reason why they were not militant, there was no reason. There was no reason to be militant. And so as a result, an outsider person who's militant could easily overtake 5-6 countries at the same time, quick. Because a group of people, a group of thousands of women who are just existing without any militant protecting them, because there was no reason back then. You see what I'm saying? There was no reason for people to be militant for, without a reason to be militant for. But the Europeans had a lot of tribal things fighting for a long time before they even left Europe. Same thing in the Arab world. There were a lot of fighting between Arabs and Europeans and things of that nature. It happened a lot before even they left Europe or Arab to come to Africa. Africa had pretty much a lot of African countries, they were not militant. Look how big Africa is. Very few tribes were militant in Africa. Very, very few. Very few. The wars they fought in Africa, within tribal wars which African fought, were less destructive. There were very few. There could be very few casualties. A war could kill 2,000 or 3,000 people. And then they come to negotiation. That's a very few number compared to what took place when outsiders like Arabs came in and Europeans came in. They came with the better weapons. They made the killing of other tribes much worse. Because prior to that, African tribes could fight with each other, and 2,000 people could be too much. 800 people lost could be too much. 3,000 people lost could be too much at that time. And they would come to negotiation. Then they trade or barter trade to settle disputes like that. But then when Arabs came in and Europeans came, they came with much better tools, much stronger weaponry. And that led to more disastrous tribal conflict. Instead of losing 10,000 people, you are now losing people into hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands, which never existed prior to foreign coming to Africa, which never existed. And it led to pretty much, instead of losing 3,000 people, you lose 300,000. Instead of losing 10,000 people, which was a huge number to even lose 10,000 back then, you now lose 400, 500,000, 600,000, a million. Numbers which back then were unimaginable. You saw what I'm saying? It was unimaginable to lose that number. But the coming of Arabs into the continent, and then later on the Europeans made it disastrous for the continent. You know what I'm saying? And a lot of trade, a lot of African kings back then, realizing the impact of foreign weaponry, they started engaging in trading with merchant, because now they were alarmed with the weaponry and things of that nature, which were better, stronger than back in Africa, because these other tribes like European and Arab has been fighting like that for many years before they left their regions to the continent. You know what I'm saying? So by the time when they came to the continent, they were better equipped than in Africa. In Africa, there was no reason to fight. Same thing in North America. The native Indians were fighting each other with very few tools. But when Europeans came in with the better tools, there was no match. Same thing in South America. A lot of tribal people had very sort of like primitive equipment. You know what I mean? So when the outsiders came in, it became easy for them to get wiped out easy, or to be defeated easy. Because if you meet a tribe which is more stronger than you, and then you you had never had any reason to be militant like in Africa. Many African tribes had no reason to be militant. But the issue I wanted to talk about was the issue of what Ethiopians and Eritreans. Ethiopians, Eritreans, Somalis, and all people of North Africa, all of them are mixed with the Middle East. Their forefathers are a lot of Ethiopians. Their forefathers are from Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and in the Middle East. A lot of black people in Somalia, Ethiopia, all their culture come from the Middle East. This is why when they are in Africa, they look towards the Middle East. They don't look towards the bulk of Africa, because they've been told, and they're well aware, majority of them, because they're born in Africa, they're confused. They're not aware that being born in Africa doesn't necessarily mean you are native. You see, 7 million people in South Africa. There are 7 million people what they call colored or biracial people. All of them were born from Caucasian fathers and native black females. Native black. It was never. It didn't say that the other side of this bad thing. It didn't include black males. It was always, because when Europeans came in, they were in charge. When the Arabs came in, they were the ones in charge. So they had access to the females. All of them were access to the female. Black men were not access to any of these females, to the foreign women. Black men had never, Africans had never accessed any foreign female, even in Africa. They never accessed an Arab lady or a Caucasian female in Africa. Never. That never existed. To the present day, never existed. So, due to the fact of that nature, if you look at the Ethiopians, because they're born in Africa, they think they're natives. A lot of Ethiopians, Somalians, and Eritreans are not aware that their forefathers were Arab males in the Middle East, because for them, the mentality is, I'm being born in Africa, so that makes me native to Africa. They have no idea that no, being born in Africa does not necessarily make you a native. The natives ones are the Bantu. Not only the Bantu, West Africans. West Africa and South of Africa. Those are the bulk. This is the place where the bulk is native. The South of African countries. And then the West of African countries. And then the Midlands of African countries. That's the region of natives. The North, the natives include people like South Sudan. That's where the natives are. Kenya, that's where the natives are. Down going to South Tanzania, that's where the natives are. But the majority in West Africa, that's where the natives, and then down south. North Africa, where people include the North Sudan and North Sudan, Eritrea, Djibouti, Somalia, and Ethiopia. Every black person of that region, their ancestors are from the Middle East. It has been known in Africa, but many people in Africa did not want to talk about these topics. But it has been known, it has been passed on and on that Ethiopians were not black. The reason why Ethiopians were not classified as black, a lot of people in the continent classify them. Should people born from people who were not in Africa, the word black was removed from Ethiopia due to the fact that in Africa they classified someone black to be fathered by black men. That's the cultural narrative in Africa. The African culture says children are named through their father. Children adopt their father's culture or their father, the bloodline. Not the mother, because the mother was seen as the mother could have 10 men. A female can sleep with 5 males. One is going to impregnate the female, and the children are going to take the name of the biological father. They can't take the name of 5 fathers. This is why in Africa, culturally, children are named only through the father, only through the biological father, because a female can have different males. You know what I'm saying? As a result, this is why a lot of Ethiopians are not aware that their forefathers are from the Middle East. You sort of almost 80% of the Horn of Africa, which includes Ethiopia, Somalia, Eritrea, and Djibouti, majority of people from there, their fathers are from the Middle East. The only difference between them is that the Middle East males, when they fathered children in Africa, they didn't take them to the Middle East. You saw what I'm saying? It was just fathering children and leaving them there. Same thing with South Africa. South Africa, when Europeans came to South Africa, they settled there, fathered children, and left them there. And so, as a result of this thing going on, a lot of people are not aware that they're not natives. You see, a Frenchman can go to the continent in Africa, fathers children there, then go to France without their children. Because back then in France, back then in Europe, they didn't take mixed children. Europeans didn't take mixed children. They classified them as dark or black. And the racism at that time was extremely high during this time. So, but at the same time, a lot of Europeans were in charge of African countries. A lot of Arab countries were in charge of African countries prior to North Africa. So the children which were fathered with the black natives, they didn't smuggle them to their countries. They didn't take them, nothing at all. They had almost throughout the entire Africa, over 200 million children were fathered by Arabs and Europeans. Okay, in the last 1,000 years. In Africa, in the last 1,000 years, in Africa. But at the same time, they didn't take these children back to the continent. Because when Europeans came in, it was only European males who were soldiers and Arab males who were male, who were fathering children in African countries they controlled. And then in the long run, they didn't take their children to the Middle East or to Europe. No, they fathered them and left them there. You see what I'm saying? So you can imagine over time, these children, because they were born and left in Africa, they thought the children had the mentality that were native because they were born in Africa. Meanwhile, they didn't consider the consideration that the fathers were not black. Nobody considered that. People thought being born in Africa should qualify you to be natives and black, but that was not the case. A lot of African countries knew, a lot of black people in Africa knew that from the beginning, that's not the case. Being born in Africa doesn't necessarily make you a native. If you go to Kenya, a lot of Kenyan natives, if you look at the Kenyan native, what they call the Maasai people, every Maasai person is black. There is no mixed Maasai, there's no light skinned Maasai. They're all black and they've got similar dark skin color. All of them. It's all of them. You can tell the tribe. Because Africa has got different tribes in Africa has got different features. Different regions has got different features. Back then, every tribe was ruled by a certain king. You could be 10,000, one king. 500,000, one king. 1 million people as a tribe, one king. And there were a lot of kings in Africa. There was a lot, hundreds of kings, thousands of kings. Each and every. This is why in Africa, there are more languages spoken in Africa than Asia, Europe, America, and Canada combined. Because in Africa, every king had their own people and their own tribe. People could be 10,000 and have their own language and their own king. 10,000 have their own. This is why if you go to each and every African country, it's got different languages in them. They all have got different languages. A small country the size of, in Africa, a small country the size of Iowa. The size of Iowa. You go in there, it with 40 languages. 40 languages, 40 tribes in a small country in Africa. You see what I'm saying? But the issue is that a lot of people, especially Ethiopians are not aware. Because of them, the reason why Ethiopians are confused and the majority of Ethiopians are not aware that they're not native to Africa is because they're born in Africa. In their mentality, being born in Africa should make us native enough. When in reality, it doesn't make it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. A lot of Ethiopians are not aware. You know what I'm saying? They're not aware that it doesn't work like that. Because you are born in the continent, it doesn't necessarily make you a native. You know what I'm saying? A lot of them, they don't know. They just think, if I'm born in Africa, I'm supposed to be a native. No. If you look at the Maasai people were the largest group in North Africa. The females in Maasai, if you look at their facial features, they look nothing like Nigerian. Nigerians have got a more big nose, broader shoulders and things like that. They look nothing like the Kenyan East. And the Kenyan women, which are the Maasai, the Maasai was the largest group of women. There were millions of Maasai. Today they've been reduced and interbred. But the Maasai back then, if you look at the Maasai women, they're pretty, they've got small heads. Those are the groups which are believed in Africa have been raped, a lot of them. Long time ago by the Arabs mentioned who coming into the continent in Africa. And then the children born were the ones you see in what you call in Ethiopia today. People you see in Ethiopia and Somalia, their features, they all come from the Maasai women. You saw what I'm saying? But today they've been interbred, and the children born took the culture of the Middle East. Now they can't reverse themselves. They no longer know they are naturally natives, which used to be North Africa before even Kenya was a boundary. Kenya and the North Sudan was one country. Kenya and the South Sudan. Kenyans, Maasai and South Sudan, one people. If you look at the features of the Maasai and the South Sudan people, they've got similar skin features. They're all dark. They've got similar features. But sadly, back in the days, the females were being raped in their hundreds and thousands, and the children born. Imagine if you rape 10 million black women in that region alone. 10 million black women raped. How many babies are you going to produce? 10 million babies. Now, if those women are raped again, second children, they're 20 million. If we rape them 20 times, you are going to have a completely different children, which looks nothing like the native Maasai or the native black South Sudanian women. You see, the South Sudanians are extremely black, and their black is smooth, clean black, very dark black, and it's very smooth. But then if you rape those females, and then the children born, especially from the Arabs who were mating with these black females, they produced people you see in Ethiopia. You saw them. Their features, they can't see their features in the Middle East, because Middle Eastern men like Iran, Turkey, they're all Caucasian looking. They're all Arab Caucasian looking. Completely. So that's why they think they're natives in Africa. Because if they look at their forefathers who fathered them, they look nothing like the Middle East. Because the Middle East is just a brownish type Caucasian, but they're actually Caucasian. All Middle East people are Caucasian. They're just, their skin color is not as white simply because of the regions they live. They live in a hotter region. You see what I'm saying? That's why they don't have complete Caucasian white skin, which is in the north of in colder countries like in Europe. But Arabs are not aware of that. See, in Arab, they think being an Arab is not a race. No. It's just a name. You see what I'm saying? It's not a race. This is why the Middle Eastern people, again, they're not aware. They take names of religion as if it's a race. Oh, I'm Muslim. It's not a race being a Muslim, because anybody can be a Muslim. It's not a race. But they're not aware of that. A lot of what they call Ethiopians don't know anything. Ethiopians think they're native. You see what I'm saying? They think they're native because they are not aware of nearly over 1,000 years. Black people in the south of Africa have been mixing. They've been raped. A lot of black women have been raped in Africa when Arabs were in charge of Africa. In fact, Arabs are the ones which triggered slave trade, because they were claiming a lot of African tribes as theirs, because they saw a lot of African countries, a lot of African tribes were not militant. So it was easy to overtake a tribe in which there is hundreds and thousands of women and there's no military at all. There's just a king and his own subject, a king and his own subject. Very few people could overtake women, because back then women were easy to control. Back then than today. It was easy to control people. Any country with 10,000 guns, if you have got 10,000 guns and you go into a country where there is 10 million people and nobody has got a gun, it's easy to overtake. You don't need rocket science. It's extremely easy to overtake, because nobody's armed, nobody's well aware, nobody has ever seen a gun. So many people were surprised even to see a gun. It was a new thing. Like, it was very easy. It was a new thing, and people realized, like, with a gun you could take 100 people, 200 people, but the person with a spear is going to take long to even attack one person. You see what I'm saying? But the person with a gun could take 500 people, 1,000 people. You see what I'm saying? That's why a lot of Ethiopians are not aware. Ethiopians are not natives to Africa. They think they're native because they're born in Africa. It's like a mixed person who's born in Africa from fathered by Europeans. Again, being born in Africa, it confuses them. A lot think they're native because I'm born in Africa. That's the mentality they took. If you look at Somalians, Ethiopians, Djiboutians, and Eritreans, most of these people, and those in those in North Sudan, because they're born in Africa, they think that means they're natives because they're born in Africa. They're not aware who's fathering them. They're not aware. A lot of people in Africa are not aware, like in South Africa. South Africa has got nearly 7 million mixed people. But because they're born in the continent, they're not aware that being born in Africa doesn't make you a native. This is why a lot of native black people, natives in Africa, are well aware who's natives and who's not. They can look at you and pinpoint your feature belong to this region. In Africa, certain regions had different type of people. So real native people in Africa, they can look at your skin and know this person belongs to this region. This person looking like this belongs to region. This is why if you look at Nigerians, they don't look like East Africans. West Africa look nothing like Somali. Even if you look at black people who are dark skinned, the Maasai, natives in Kenya, look at the natives in Nigeria, they look completely different. And if you look at Nigerians, they look completely different than the Bushmen in the south of South Africa. Every region in Africa had its certain features. You see what I'm saying? But then when the foreigners came to the continent and mixed with the natives, the children born became confused. Number one, they didn't look like their forefathers who fathered them in Europe and in the Middle East. So they took a different narrative to who they are. Some started, I'm Muslim, I'm this, and they took different sort of like identities, which in reality is not. Because a person who's fathered between a native Maasai black woman and an Arab male from the Middle East or Afghanistan or Turkey, they go to the Turkey and Afghanistan and they see none of those males have got their features. Then they come back to Africa and say, well, I was born here, I'm native here in Africa. When in reality, the real father is in the Middle East, but the only difference is that your features are not going to look like the Arab males. Your features of the children. This is why a lot of Ethiopians, Somalians, Eritreans, and people in Djibouti and all those people, if they go to the Middle East, they see the Middle East don't have their features. Same thing applies with a black person who's born between a Caucasian man and a black woman. You go to Europe, you don't look like Europeans. You don't look like them. So you get lost. So you're like, one way I'm fathered by Europe, but I don't look European. The mother is from Africa. The father is from a different continent. And the children have become lost. This is exactly which took place in Africa. A lot of people are not aware that being born in Africa does not make you a native. A lot of people born in Africa, it confuses them. And many people, especially mixed people in North Africa, they're not aware of that. They're not aware. They believed long time ago that because I'm born in the continent, I'm supposed to be native. When in reality, being born in Africa doesn't make you a native. This is why a lot of times Ethiopians have been rejected as blacks in Africa. Many people in Africa, they are well aware in Africa that they look at your father. That's where in the culture of Africa, they look at your father. Who fathered you? You saw what I'm saying? And many Ethiopians have been fathered by Middle East Arab males. And as a result, they know we don't look Middle Eastern enough. But they're children of the Middle East. Ethiopians are children of the Middle East. In Africa, they've been rejected. They have been, in many black people in Africa who are native. If you take a Maasai black woman in Kenya, she's native there. She's the native of Kenya and native to that region. And if they look at a Somali, they can see these people don't belong here. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't matter whether they're born there in Africa. They can see these people don't belong there in Africa. A lot of people who are born in Africa, including Somalians, they're known in Africa like they don't belong here. They're seen in Africa as foreign children. This is why a lot of Ethiopians say, I'm not black. The reason why they say they're not black because they're well aware the fathers were not black males. See, Obama knows his father is black from Kenya. He can take the black identity through the father. But those born from non-black males, they don't, in Africa, they were never classified as black through the father. Because in Africa, the culture of African countries, black African countries, say all children are named through their father, and they should be called names only through their father. And as a result of a person born from a fathered from someone who is not continent, they're classified as not black. The black is removed. The word black itself is completely removed. In Africa, the word black in Africa is seen as native. In Africa, if a person said, I'm black, they classify that you are native. To call yourself black in Africa is seen as native. So if you call yourself African or black, as far as Africa is concerned, that means native. I'm native to this land. You know what I'm saying? But Ethiopians are classified as not natives. This is why in Africa they're classified as not black, or they're viewed as not in Africa itself. Because a lot of them, they were fathered by Arab males. And Arab males in Africa are classified as not natives to Africa. Every Arab person from Egypt, it could be Libya, they're viewed as not natives. You know what I'm saying? They're viewed as not natives. Even that leader who's called Gaddafi used to say Arab countries or Arab people in the north of Africa are not natives to that region. He's the only guy who used to tell the truth, that they're not natives to that region. He knew they were not natives, because he knew that Arabs in the North Africa came from outside. They came from outside. They came from the Middle East and settled there. But because many people settled there, they don't take the name of the land because they're settlers. You know what I'm saying? Blacks are natives. Me, myself, my features, I'm native to the continent. I'm native. I don't need even explanation. I'm native. You see what I'm saying? But Somalians are not classified as natives, because in Africa, a lot of black people, our ancestors and our grandmothers used to say these the Ethiopians, their forefathers were not black. So it went on and on and on in Africa, but these issues were not discussed. Just like the same thing that a black females could marry non-black males or Europeans or things like that. But then the issue of their children is not discussed. It's silenced to say, whose children are these? It's silenced. But because a lot of time, black men were not allowed even to date an Arab male or European man for a long time. But all these people had access to black women. So they fathered hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of the children in Africa. As a result, those children became nations. And those nations became countries like Ethiopia, Djibouti, Somalia, North Sudan. And so what do you do if you have got 100 million Mularos in Africa? That's like 3 or 4 nations over there. What happens if you've got 250 million Mularos in the continent? Born in the continent. You see what I'm saying? Are you going to call them black? Native? No. Many people say, if you've got such a number of people, and there are millions now, you've produced a nation of people. You've produced a native. They won't look native. They won't look as natural as native as a black person, as a black woman who mothered them. And at the same time, they don't look as Caucasian as the forefathers they fathered them, or an Arab male who fathered them. So they become in between. And the children became lost. And the children, because they're born in Africa, they took the identities of Africa that, so we must be native because we are born in Africa. When in reality, being born in Africa doesn't necessarily mean anything. So being born in Africa doesn't make you a native. It doesn't. A lot of people thought being born in Africa should be native enough. That's how the mentality goes in North Africa. Ethiopians, Eritreans, Djiboutians, and Eritreans, and Somalians, most of them, they just take the mentality that we are born here in Africa. That means we should be native. When in reality, you could be born in Africa from foreign people. But because many people were not considering, being born from foreign people, they didn't consider it. A lot of people didn't consider. Until now, with the recent DNA test, many people thought being born in Africa should make you foreign, should make you black enough or native enough. When in reality, it doesn't mean anything. Who's your father? You are born in Africa. Who's your father? He's German. What about you? France. What about you? Portuguese. What about you, father? Iran. There are many people are born like that in the country in Africa. There are many people in North Africa whose fathers are Turkey. Iran, Saudi Arabia. And all of them, who's the father? Who's the mother? A black native. Who's the father? Foreign. And these children, imagine if these children are in their millions. Not just one, not just 10,000. Imagine your father mixed a lot of Malaros. Now you've got 40, 50, 100 million. 100 billion. And you've produced nations. You see what I'm saying? That's how the negative impact of interracial stuff back in Africa. It produced completely nations. And many people are not aware of that. Because it's a subject which was never spoken in Africa. This is why you see a lot of black people in the North Africa has got Arab names even today. Oh, my name is Muhammad, I'm Abdullah, That is not an African name. That's the Middle East stuff. That's not an African. That's not an African and that's not black. And many black people know that these names are not from here. They're Middle Eastern. You see what I'm saying? But many children born in Africa, they get confused because they think being born in Africa should make them native, when in reality, being born in Africa doesn't make you a native. A native, you can see, it's a Maasai. You can go in many parts in Africa, you can see the natives. You see what I mean? But many people, they get confused. Why? Because they're born in Africa. That confuses them, that surely being born in Africa, that should make me a native black person, when in reality it doesn't. It doesn't. You see what I'm saying? Many people in Africa, they used to follow the father's bloodline. You know what I'm saying? But Ethiopians, a lot of them, their forefathers are Arabs in the Middle East. But because the mother is a native and their fathers are foreign, the children took the culture and all the things from the foreign. You know what I mean? As the mothers died and passed on, the children remained with the cultures of their forefathers. This is why you see a lot of Arab mixed black are in the north. You know what I'm saying? Because people always take the culture of their forefather. They don't take the culture of the mother. You know what I'm saying? They don't. In Africa, they don't. Because taking the culture of the mother was seen as confusion. As the mother could have 5 children with 5 different fathers. You know what I'm saying? So they always take the culture of the forefathers. That's how many African countries ended up with the Islamic culture. It's through the interbreeding. You know what I'm saying? The children born from foreign fathers, they took that culture of their foreign father and remained with that foreign culture in Africa. You know, if these children were born in Africa and taken back to the Middle East, Africa would not be Islamic today. North Africa would not be Islamic. Nobody would be Islamic. Black people wouldn't be Islamic. If people would take their children with them. But a lot of people, when they father children with the black females, especially Arabs, back then they father children with black women. They were just fathering black women because it was easy for them to access them, black women. It was easy to just rape a black woman. There was no police, nothing. Just tribes alone, with no police, no soldier. So someone could impregnate thousands and thousands. But then, look at the thing. What are you going to do with the children born? Are you going to send it? Are they going to take them and let's go with them to their own country? They won't fit in. As a result, they left them there. You see what I'm saying? But what will happen if you've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of mixed children left there in Africa? And those children will adopt the culture of their forefathers. But then they'll end up thinking they're native there. Because we are born in Africa, we're supposed to be native. When in reality, being born in a place doesn't necessarily make you a native. I can go back with my pregnant woman in China. And you give birth to a child in China. It doesn't necessarily make you a native in China. You see, anybody can give birth in any place. It doesn't necessarily make you a native. But the children, people born in Africa, it's the mentality that because you are being born in Africa, that means that the children are natives. No. In reality, the fathers are going to determine your native status. If a black man in Africa and a black woman in Africa have a child, that child is native. If a child is from a black woman and an Arab man from Turkey, or the Middle East, Iran, Saudi Arabia, that child is not native. And most of their children look Ethiopian. You see what I'm saying? But many people, a lot of these people are confused because they say, but I'm born in Africa. Surely I'm supposed to be black because I'm born in Africa. When in reality, a lot of native Africans are well aware. They look at your features, they know these people have got foreign features.
Being born in Africa it doesn't mean anything, because real native black people, they can see it clear in Africa. They can just look at you and tell these people look foreign. A lot of Ethiopians were classified as not black and foreign. They were classified as not black in Africa, and they know it. These are things they don't discuss. Ethiopians are not aware that they're not necessarily native in Ethiopia. Even if you take a DNA of Ethiopia, the Ethiopia place there, nobody lived in that Horn of Africa. Many people migrated to that place. Nobody lived in the Horn of Africa where nobody lived in that region. It's a place when people were moving. It's a sort of like a transit place. You see what I'm saying? Nigeria today is with the largest population, nearly 200 million black. Most of them, they don't belong there. But during slavery, they were to be shipped out. And many of them coming from inner Africa, they settled in Nigeria, ready to be transferred to Ghana, to be out. And when slavery was over, they remained in places where they were supposed to move out to go to America and other, countries in South America. But a lot of people ended up settling in places where they were put, and Nigeria was the place where they were put. This is why Nigeria has got the largest population in Africa, because a lot of black people, they don't belong there in Nigeria. They belong in other countries. You know what I'm saying? But what happened when you are shipped into a different country? A lot of Ethiopians, you can take an Ethiopian person today, take that DNA, you'd see half of it is from the Middle East. And majority of them, they didn't discuss that. Majority of them had no idea. You see that they've got the DNA of the Middle East. They had no idea, because they believed that because they are born in Africa, that means that should mean they're natives, when in reality that doesn't mean anything. Being born in Africa doesn't necessarily make you a native. The real natives know that in Africa. The real natives in Africa, you can see their features like native black people in Africa. They know each other. They know. You know what I mean? Me, myself, I know I'm native. I'm 100% black. You see, my features are native. My kinky hair and everything is all native. Ethiopians are not aware, because Ethiopians thought because they're born in Africa, that should qualify them as natives, when in reality, the fathers are not. You see what I'm saying? Obama was loved a lot. Obama was loved a lot in Africa. Why? Because a lot of black people, they looked at Obama and they said Obama is born from a native black man. As a result, he's believed his ancestors are in Africa, not in Europe. If Obama was to go leave America and say, oh, let me go to my ancestors, he would be coming to Europe. He would be coming to Africa and not Europe. His bloodline father is coming to Africa. This is why a lot of black people from Kenya, Tanzania, a lot of African countries, they loved Obama. They all glorified Obama. Everybody was happy for Obama, because as far as they're concerned, he's a native person there. The bloodline is through their father. If Obama was like a person, if Obama was like his father was from Europe and the mother in Africa, nobody would have accepted them in Africa. They would have just looked at him and think, this child, he doesn't belong here. He probably wouldn't have that name Obama. He probably would have some name like Douglas Alexandria or some George Matthews, Bismarck or whatever. A name which doesn't sound native to black people. And the black people would be just looking at him like, okay, or he's his son. They wouldn't even care less. He would have never really received the love he had if he was not fathered by black men. He would have never really received the love he had. But because Obama was fathered by black native African men, the love he's seen as, he's native here. His ancestors belong over there. His grandmother in Africa, his ancestors belong over there. His graves of these ancestors, some are over there, some are over there, some in that region, because with the fathers. If his fathers were not from Africa, nobody would say, they would say, where does his ancestors belong? Many African people say, he doesn't belong here. You see, if his father were not black, if Obama's father was not black, he was not going to go to Africa at all. They were not going to welcome him. They would just look at him and say, They wouldn't even classify him as black. But because they are in Africa, they well know the bloodline is through the father. The bloodline is through the father. This is why long time ago, a lot of kings used to marry a lot of women to get the sons, to have the sons. They know that the wealth and the name is going to be passed on through the sons. The daughters, a daughter can marry 5 men and have 5 different surnames. This is why women having children, girls, was meaningless for a lot of kings. They always wanted to have sons, boys, because they know their bloodline is going to come through their sons. Their bloodline is going to come through their son, not a girl. A girl is not going. A girl can have 4 men. Which of the name is she going to take? You see what I'm saying? But the children are going to stick with the bloodline of the father, the biological bloodline. You know what I'm saying? That is why a lot of Obama was loved in Africa. He was loved in Africa because in Africa they learned that he's fathered by a native black African man here, and they understood like that means the ancestors of this man is here in Africa. And as a result, a lot of black women loved him. A lot of black people, they loved him. Because as far as they're concerned, he is just an African son coming back. But if he was not fathered by a black man, he would be seen as his ancestors don't belong here. That's what I'm saying. Where his ancestors don't belong. His name and his surname would be different. The way Obama is in Africa, he would have a different name. You know what I'm saying? You can't have a Greek name and come to Africa with a Greek name. It doesn't make sense. You know what I'm saying? So this is why I say a lot of people are not aware. A lot of people, especially black people, they're not aware that children couple. That's why a lot of people are confused in the Middle East. A lot of Ethiopians are confused because they don't look Arab enough to be in the Middle East, and at the same time, being in Africa, they don't look black enough to be native. And they get confused. You see what I'm saying? A lot of people are not aware that Ethiopia is not a race. Djibouti, Somalia, these are not races. No. These are names of the land. It's a name of the land. Just like Yugoslavia. Canada. These are name of land. They're not name of people. Name of landscape. You can name a land without people. You see what I'm saying? You can name it. Any land can be named without people. You don't need people to name landscape. You know what I'm saying? So a lot of people, they're not aware of that. Ethiopians think Ethiopia is a race. It's not a race. They're very confused. A lot of people, they're not that educated. A lot of people. Because back then, people were following the religion and the culture instead of the race. Who fathered who? They're following religion instead of... That's why many people think being Muslim is a race. Muslim is not a race. It's a religion. A lot of people are not aware of the name of a nation. America is not a race. It's the name of the land, North America. You see, it's not a race. America is not a race. It's the name of the land. You know what I mean? Canada is not a race. It's the name of the land. You can remove everybody in this country and still name that country Canada. You can remove everybody. You can remove everybody in North America, and that place will still be called America. Without human beings. This is why a lot of people, they get confused with the names of landscape and people and race. They get confused. You know what I'm saying? This is what confused a lot of Ethiopians. A lot of Ethiopians are not aware that they're not necessarily a race. They have no idea. If you take an Ethiopian person, you are going to find them with the Swahili, Bantu culture, DNA. Is going to be either Bantu south of Ethiopia, which include countries like Kenya, Tanzania, down there, because a lot of people moved from that region towards the Middle East, towards North Africa, moving out. This is why if you take the DNA of Ethiopia, nobody in Ethiopia has got an Ethiopian DNA. There is nothing called Ethiopian DNA. All of them, their DNA is not there in the places they are in. You see what I'm saying? If you take the DNA of Ethiopia, you shock a lot of Ethiopians. A lot of Ethiopians, if they take the DNA today, or Somalis, they'll be surprised. No Somali DNA. They've got Middle East and down south in African tribes. And they get so confused. A lot of them get confused. Who am I? Why is that my DNA doesn't have any DNA of this landscape? Because you were brought to that place. Your ancestors were moving. It's a transit. The Horn of Africa was a transit. People moving out of Africa to Yemen and things like that. But interbreeding in the mix resulted in people being born in a place where they're supposed to move out. They just settled in a place where they were not supposed to settle. This is why if you take a DNA of a Somalian person, you find that there's nothing called Somali DNA. You find the Middle East DNA. They get surprised, a lot of people. A lot of people go, oh my God, my mother used to tell me that I was Somali and I'm special. Just take a DNA, you'll be shocked. Your DNA is from the Bantu going down south of Africa and no native, and the other one is Middle East. Where is the DNA of that name of the place? Where is the Somali DNA? There's nothing called Somali DNA because they are not native to that region. A lot of people are just not native because they were taking the culture and the religion without knowing that the culture and religion doesn't mean race, doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean anything. People can appropriate any culture. Then you go into a DNA test, it's not going to show. You can appropriate any culture you want. You say, I can appropriate Japanese culture, but then if I take the DNA, you're not going to find Japan. You're not going to find Japan in my bloodline. You see what I'm saying? So a lot of people are just not aware here. They're not aware, especially in Africa. Ethiopians, most of them are children of Arab males, born native African black females. You see what I'm saying? This is why a lot of people believe that what they call interracial sex destroys people. In many parts, if you're not careful, it can produce a new race, new breeds, and things of that nature. It can replace, or pretty much it can, back in the past, it led to exterminations of other races or native people. You are not going to see natives, just like in America. In America, they call about Cherokee Indians. There's nothing called Cherokee Indians. All of those people who are called Cherokee Indians are nothing but European people in America today. There is nothing called Cherokee people because they were fathered by European settlers. They were the fathers were European settlers and native females and European male settlers fathered those children. As a result, all of the so-called Cherokee, the so-called Cherokee Indians in America they're nothing, just Europeans people. They're just brown-skinned Europeans, just like Arabs. You know what I'm saying? They're just not aware of it. You see, because a lot of people, they don't take things in detail. They're just not aware of it. You know what I'm saying? They're just not aware. Because the natives, go to Peru, in the south of America, you are going to see real native. Look at their features. Both male and female look the same. Peru. All the males have got long hair, long dark hair. In America, there's nothing like that. Go to Peru in South America and see real native Indians. They are still there in their millions in Peru. But in America, there is nobody's native in America today. Extremely zero. No native person. Oh, I've got a bloodline. No. Mean nothing. It doesn't mean anything. It's just mean a native female. This native female who were raped a long time ago, their bloodline, of course, it's going to get inside you. But who fathered you? It always go to the father. Who fathered you? You know what I'm saying? And that's where the devil. That's why they say the devil's in the detail. Who fathered you? You're not going to say, oh, I'm native Indian. Who fathered you? My father is Caucasian and my mother is a native here. That doesn't necessarily mean you're native. That means you belong to Europe. You see, by that logic, that means you belong to Europe. So this is what I was saying about Ethiopians. Ethiopians are not aware that they are not natives in Africa. They just think simply because we were born in Africa, surely that should make us native enough. No. If the fathers are not native, you are not native. If the father is not native in that environment, in that place, you are not. You see what I'm saying? But a lot of people, those who fathered these children, like in Arab males, they didn't take their children to the Middle East. If back in the day people would take their children to their native lands, millions of Ethiopians would be in the Middle East today. The Middle East would have the largest so-called black population. The Middle East. Why are they not there? Because many of these Arab males were not taking their so-called black children to their countries. They were just impregnating in Africa and leaving them there. You see what I'm saying? Think of the mixed people you see in South America. Those who were fathered by the Portuguese in Brazil. Think of the situation in millions. They're in millions in Brazil. They're in millions. Think of the situation if they would take them to Portugal. Portugal would have the largest population of black people as we speak. If people would accept their children through the fatherhood bloodline, but many people rejected these mixed children because they couldn't fit into the fathers who were not black, who were Caucasian or Arab. That's why a lot of people would father children and leave them there. Think of a situation if whoever fathers a child take that child to their own country. Then millions of people you see in Brazil, of the so-called mixed or mulattoes in Brazil, think of that situation, they would be in Europe. What would be the impact? You would have nearly 150 to 200 million mixed people in Europe who would be seen as black. Just think of the situation like, oh my God, if these people would be taken by but back in the day, people were just fathering children with slaves, fathering children and leaving, fathering children and leaving. And many of those children, they get confused. If you say, well, your ancestors are in Africa, who fathered them? Who was fathering these children? Nobody wants to talk. They'll be like, it's a black woman who was the mother. But who were the fathers? None of those fathers were black males. You see, that's the thing. That's the other thing which many people don't want to discuss. Who fathered these people? Not just a black woman. Not to say that the black woman is the mother. No. Who fathered these children? Think of a situation if people would father children and take their children to their native countries. You saw what I'm saying? Or Europeans shipping millions of mulattoes to Europe in their millions. Then Europe would have the largest population of black people today as we speak. You know what I'm saying? But because many people rejected these mulattoes and they're black, let's leave them there, let's throw them to the black side. And a lot of mulattoes, if they look at Africa, we don't look natives as the ones in Africa. You see, because many people are not aware of the mixing side. They don't consider the mixing side. They're just considering Africa and black as a color. But what if you're mixed up with the two? You're not going to look similar to the natives in Africa. If a Maasai woman sleeps with a native, a Maasai woman who's natives in Kenya sleeps with an Arab man from Turkey, the child is not going to look native like the Maasai woman. And at the same time, they won't look Arab enough to be considered Arab in Turkey. So they'll be nowhere. And if they're born in Africa, they'll be thinking, oh my God, I must be native here in Africa. No. The fathers were not native. Fathers were foreign. A lot of people are just not aware of the technical realities of the past, what was happening in the past. A lot of people, they're not aware of that. Because a lot of people are adopting cultures and religion instead of races or who fathered them. You know what I'm saying? So, because I went to these things in details, and I knew this even when I was in the continent. I was just looking at Ethiopians like this, and I would see their culture and everything is Middle Eastern and everything, but they're not aware, a lot of people. Because in Africa, a lot of these things are not discussed. You know, they're shunned. They're just, people think, because you are born in Africa, we'll just call you native. You're just native African. Because you're born in Africa. No, it doesn't mean anything. Who fathered you? That's what they call the devils in the detail. Who fathered you? See what I'm saying? That's the thing. A lot of people in Ethiopia, they're not aware. They're just completely not aware of anything. Bye.